In 1943, a Vermont farmer fed his family of 9 through an entire winter with no refrigerator, no freezer, and a grocery bill of almost nothing. His secret was a hole in the ground behind the house. By March, he still had crisp carrots, firm apples, and eggs that tasted fresh laid. Number 7 on this list could keep eggs edible for 9 months without a single drop of refrigeration. Number 3 was so reliable that families bet their survival on it every winter. And number 1 is the trick almost every American grandmother knew, and almost no one alive can still do right. These 25 root cellar secrets fed a nation before electricity. Then we forgot them the moment the power company showed up. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down. Number 25. Carrots and beets buried in damp sand. Here is the problem nobody warns you about. A root cellar is cold, but it is also drying, and a carrot left on an open shelf goes limp and rubbery in a week. Your great-grandmother solved this with a wooden crate and a bucket of damp sand. She would lay the carrots down in a single layer, never letting them touch, then pour sand over the top until they vanished. Then start another layer. The sand held just enough moisture against the skin to stop the carrots from breathing themselves dry. Beets, turnips, and parsnips went into the same boxes. By February, you reached your bare hand into cold sand and pulled out a carrot as firm and sweet as the day it was lifted from the garden. A bushel of carrots cost about 40 cents in 1950. Stored in sand, that bushel lasted until spring. Stored on a shelf, it was garbage by Christmas. Number 24. Apples wrapped one by one in newspaper. Every farm wife knew the old saying about one bad apple, but she also knew exactly why it was true. A single apple, as it ripens, breathes out a gas called ethylene, and that gas tells every apple near it to ripen faster and then rot. So she gave each apple its own little coffin of newspaper, twisting the ends shut, and packed them stem down in a barrel or crate. The paper trapped the ethylene around each fruit and stopped the chain reaction. If one apple turned, the rot stayed sealed in its own wrapper instead of running through the whole barrel overnight. A wrapped apple in a cold cellar held firm into March or April. Scientists now sell ethylene-absorbing sachets in fancy produce bags for $3 a piece. Your grandmother did the same job with yesterday's want ads, and she got the news for free first. Number 23. Onion braids hung in the dry corner. Onions hate everything a carrot loves. Damp sand would rot them in days. So onions never went in the cold, wet part of the cellar at all. After harvest, they were left in the sun until the necks dried and the skins turned papery. And then the tops were braided together into long ropes and hung from a rafter in the driest, airiest corner near the stairs. Hanging them did 2 things. It kept air moving around every bulb so moisture never collected, and it let you spot a soft onion instantly and pull it before it spoiled its neighbors. A good braid of a few dozen onions hung there from October to April, and the family pulled one off the bottom whenever a pot of soup needed it. The whole corner smelled sharp and clean. That smell meant the cellar was working. Number 22. Garlic kept high, dry, and far from the floor. Garlic followed the onion's rules, but demanded them even stricter. Down low near the dirt floor, where the cold and damp pooled, garlic would sprout green shoots or turn to gray dust inside its skin. So it was cured hard and hung high, sometimes in a mesh bag, sometimes braided, always up near the ceiling where the air was warmest and driest. A single head pulled down in January, snapped apart, and dropped into a pot of beans carried the entire summer garden in one clove. Families who grew a season's worth of garlic, maybe 100 heads, stored the whole crop this way and never bought a bulb. We pay $2 now for 3 heads in a plastic net that sprout on the counter in a week, having forgotten that garlic only ever asked for one thing: keep it dry and it will keep you fed. Number 21. Cabbages pulled with their roots still on. This is the one that looks strange until you understand it. Instead of cutting the heads, the whole cabbage plant was pulled out of the ground, roots and all, dirt still clinging. The outer leaves were left ragged and loose on purpose because those leaves were the cabbage's own armor. Some families hung the plants upside down from the rafters by their roots. Others dug a shallow trench in the cellar floor and replanted them, roots in the soil, so the heads kept drawing a little moisture and stayed crisp for months. The catch was the smell. A cabbage left too long perfumes a whole cellar, so the careful ones kept their cabbages near the vent or in a separate corner. A field of cabbage cost almost nothing to grow, and stored this way it fed a family slaw, kraut, and boiled dinners straight through the cold months. First pattern break. Here is where most people misunderstand what a root cellar actually was. It was not one cold room. It was two completely different climates living in the same hole in the ground. And knowing which food belonged in which spot was the whole arty. Down low, near the dirt floor, the air was cold and wet, almost 40 degrees and dripping with humidity. That is where the roots went, the carrots and beets and turnips that wanted to stay damp. Up high near the stairs in the vent, the air was a few degrees warmer and bone dry. That is where the onions, garlic, and squash hung, the things that rotted at the first kiss of moisture. A good cellar keeper read her cellar like a map. Put the onion where the carrot belongs, and you would lose both. Everyone knew this once. Almost no one does now. Number 20. The potato clamp for families with no cellar at all. Not every family had a stone cellar dug under the house, and the poorest had no cellar at all. They had the potato clamp, and it was pure ingenuity. On a patch of well-drained ground, they laid down a thick bed of straw, then piled potatoes and roots into a long pyramid on top of it. Over the whole mound went another deep blanket of straw, and over that, a layer of packed earth shoveled smooth like a small grave. At the very top, they left a little tuft of straw poking out as a chimney, so the pile could breathe and never sweat itself rotten. The earth and straw together held the frost out all winter. When the family needed potatoes, they opened one end, took what they wanted, and sealed it back up. A clamp built in November fed a household into the following spring, built entirely from dirt, straw, and the knowledge of how to stack them. Number 19. Winter squash, cured before it was ever stored. Throw a fresh pumpkin straight into the cellar, and it turns to slime by Thanksgiving. The forgotten step is curing. After harvest, the squash and pumpkins were set somewhere warm and sunny, a porch or a sunny windowsill, for about 10 days until their skins hardened into a shell you could knock on like wood and the stems dried to cork. That hard skin was the squash sealing its own wound against rot. Only then did they move to the cellar, and crucially, they went to the dry, slightly warmer shelves, never down in the damp with the roots. A properly cured Hubbard or butternut sat on a board, not touching its neighbors, and kept clean and sound for 6 months or more. A single big squash, 15 cents at a 1950s market, became pies, soups, and side dishes deep into winter. The curing was free. Skipping it cost you the whole harvest. Number 18. Roots left right in the ground under a mountain of mulch. Some of the best storage was never harvested at all. Parsnips, carrots, and turnips could be left exactly where they grew, with a thick blanket of straw, leaves, or mulch heaped over the row before the ground froze hard. The mulch kept the soil soft enough to dig into all winter, and the family went out with a fork and lifted dinner straight from the frozen garden. There was a hidden bonus that science later confirmed. A hard frost makes a parsnip convert its starch into sugar, so the ones dug in January tasted sweeter and richer than anything pulled in the fall. The cold did the cooking before you ever touched the pot. It cost nothing but a few armloads of leaves raked off the lawn. The garden became its own refrigerator, and the colder it got, the better the harvest tasted. Number 17. Straw and dry leaves as insulation. Before foam and fiberglass, the insulation that kept a cellar from freezing was whatever fell off the trees. Loose straw and dry oak leaves were packed around barrels, stuffed against the coldest walls, and layered between crates of apples to buffer them from sudden temperature swings. A barrel of potatoes, wrapped in a thick straw jacket, would not freeze even when a brutal cold snap drove the cellar near the danger line. The dead air trapped in all those leaves and stems did the work, the same principle as a down coat. When spring came, the spent straw went straight onto the garden or into the animal bedding, so nothing was wasted twice. It cost a morning of raking. We buy temperature-controlled storage units now and never think about the fact that a pile of leaves did the exact same job for 10,000 years. Number 16. A crock of water set on the floor for humidity. If the cellar ran too dry, roots shriveled and onions were the only thing happy. So the careful keeper set a wide pan or an open crock of water right on the dirt floor and let it slowly evaporate into the air. That gentle steam kept the humidity high enough that carrots stayed crisp and apples stayed firm, without ever letting things turn wet enough to mold. Some families simply wet the dirt floor down with a watering can every few weeks for the same effect. It was a thermostat for moisture run on nothing but a bucket of water and the patience to check it. A cellar that was too dry was as deadly to your harvest as one that was too warm, and the fix cost less than a penny. The trick was knowing to look and knowing what a limp carrot was trying to tell you. Number 15. Eggs greased to seal the shell. Hens lay heavily in spring and summer and slow to almost nothing in winter, so the old families found ways to carry the surplus across the cold months. The simplest was grease. A fresh, unwashed egg, the kind with its natural protective bloom still intact, was rubbed all over with a thin coat of lard or mineral oil, sealing the thousands of tiny pores in the shell. Those pores are how an egg slowly loses moisture and lets air creep in. And once they were sealed, the egg simply stopped aging. Stored small and down in a cool cellar, a greased egg stayed good for months. A family could grease 3 or 4 dozen at the height of summer and crack fresh-tasting eggs in the dead of January, long after the hens had quit. A spoonful of lard preserved a dozen eggs. We throw eggs out after a printed date and have forgotten they were once a thing you stored all winter on purpose. Second pattern break. Here is what we really lost when the refrigerator arrived, and it was not convenience. It was independence. A family that knew how to store eggs in summer for winter, how to carry a side of pork from October to April, how to keep a whole garden alive in the dark, was a family that did not panic when money got tight or the roads got buried in snow. They were not at the mercy of a store being open or a paycheck arriving on time. The cellar under the house was a private bank account that paid out in food. Every greased egg and every barrel of apples was a small act of self-reliance, a way of telling the hard months, "You do not scare me, I planned for you." We traded that quiet security for a humming box and a 24-hour supermarket, and most of us never noticed the trade had been made. Number 14. Eggs in water glass, the 9-month miracle. The grease trick was good. This one was legendary. Water glass was the common name for sodium silicate, a syrupy liquid sold cheap at any drugstore. Mixed with boiled water in a stone crock, it made a thin solution that the eggs were lowered into, completely submerged, where the silicate sealed every pore and locked the egg in suspended animation. Down in the cold cellar, those eggs kept for 8 or 9 months. A woman could fill a 5-gallon crock in June, lay a board and a weight on top, and pull out a perfectly good egg the following spring. The yolks held together, the whites still whipped. During both World Wars, the government actually printed instructions teaching housewives to do exactly this so the country could stretch its food. A few cents of water glass preserved dozens upon dozens of eggs through the leanest stretch of the year. Try finding anyone under 60 who has even heard the word. Number 13, the water-sealed butter crock. Butter spoils because air turns its fat rancid, so the old solution was to take the air away entirely. Butter was packed down hard into a stone crock, pressed to drive out every bubble, and then a layer of cold salted water, a brine, was poured right over the top to seal it from the air. Set in the coldest corner of the cellar, that butter stayed sweet and spreadable for weeks. The water changed out every few days to keep it fresh. The French version, a little crock with an inverted cup that hung the butter in a moat of water, did the same job on the kitchen counter. No refrigeration, no rancid edge, just butter held under a thin skin of water, exactly the way the dairy farmers' wives had done it for centuries. We pay extra now for that same French butter keeper at the kitchen store, sold as a charming antique novelty, never told it was once simple survival. Number 12, cheese sealed under wax. When the cow gave more milk than a family could drink, the surplus became cheese. And cheese was made specifically to last. A wheel of hard cheese was coated in melted wax or wrapped tight in cloth, rubbed with lard, sealing the whole thing against air and mold. Then it went down to the cool cellar to age on a wooden shelf, turned every few days so it ripened evenly. Months later, that wheel was sharper, firmer, and worth far more than the milk it started as. The wax was the whole secret, an airtight skin that let the inside ripen while keeping the outside from spoiling. A single wheel could feed a family for weeks and travel to market without a cooler in sight. Cheese was never just food. It was milk converted into a form that could survive time itself, and the wax was the spell that made it work. Number 11, the sauerkraut crock. Cabbage is fragile, but sauerkraut is nearly immortal, and the transformation happened in a stone crock in the corner of the cellar. Shredded cabbage was packed in tight with salt, layer after layer, pounded down until its own juices rose up and covered it completely. A plate and a heavy stone went on top to hold everything under the brine, because anything that touched air would rot. Then the family simply waited while wild bacteria turned the cabbage tangy and sour, and, almost magically, far more nutritious than it started. Down in the cool dark, a full crock kept for the entire winter, supplying vitamin C in a season when nothing green grew, though no one knew to call it that. They only knew the kraut kept them from getting sick. Sailors and soldiers were saved by this exact crock. A nickel of cabbage and a handful of salt became months of food that could not spoil. Third pattern break, here is the part modern science only caught up to recently. The families fermenting kraut, pickles, and sour cider in their cellars were running a microbiology lab without knowing a single scientific word for what they did. Fermentation does not just preserve food. It creates new vitamins, makes minerals easier for your body to absorb, and fills the food with the exact bacteria your gut needs to stay healthy. Researchers now sell those same bacteria back to us in expensive capsules and call them probiotics. Your great-grandmother got them free from a crock of cabbage in the corner. She did not understand the chemistry, but her instincts were perfect, and the proof was in the fact that her family stayed well through winters, with no fresh food at all. We spent 100 years calling that old food primitive. Now the laboratories are quietly admitting she was right the whole time. Number 10, salt pork in the brine barrel. Before the freezer, the only way to keep a hog through winter was salt, and the cellar barrel was where it happened. Slabs of pork belly and fat back were packed into a wooden barrel or a stone crock and buried in coarse salt or submerged in a heavy salt brine strong enough to float a potato. The salt pulled the water out of the meat, and without water, nothing could spoil it. That barrel of salt pork was the backbone of the whole winter pantry, sliced thin to flavor a pot of beans, render into grease, or fry for breakfast. A single hog, killed in November, fed a family clear through to spring out of that one barrel. Salt pork cost about 12 cents a pound at the store, but a family that raised its own hog paid only for the salt. The barrel in the cellar corner was the difference between a winter with meat and a winter without. Number 9. Leather breeches, the beans that hung from the ceiling. In the mountains of Appalachia, green beans were preserved with nothing but a needle, a thread, and time. Fresh beans were strung whole onto long threads, like beads on a necklace, and hung from the cellar rafters or the porch beams to dry. Over a few weeks, they shriveled and turned leathery, which is exactly where the name came from, leather breeches. Hung up there in the dry air, they kept for a year or more, gathering a little dust and a lot of patience. In the dead of winter, a handful was pulled down, soaked overnight, and simmered for hours with a piece of that salt pork until they plumped back into something tender and rich and tasting faintly of smoke and summer. A garden row of beans that would have rotted in a week became a year of food on a string. The whole technique cost a spool of thread. Number 8. Dried apple rings strung by the stove. Apples that were too bruised to store whole did not go to the pigs. They were peeled, cored, and sliced into thin rings, then strung on string and hung near the warmth of the stove or in the dry upper cellar to dry into chewy, sweet leather. Dried this way, apples kept for a year with no canning, no sugar, and no jars. Through the winter, those rings were eaten as candy by the children, or soaked and stewed back into something close to fresh for a pie or a sauce. A single tree, far more apples than any family could ever eat fresh, became months of fruit, hanging on a string in the corner. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and orchards while they dried. We buy them now in crinkly bags marked as a health snack, $3 for a handful, with no idea our great-grandparents made the same thing from windfalls that would otherwise have rotted on the ground. Number 7. Lime-washed cellar walls. A cellar is a damp, dark hole, the perfect breeding ground for mold and the musty smell that ruins stored food. So the careful families fought back with whitewash. The stone or earthen walls were painted with a wash of slaked lime, a cheap bright white coating that did 3 jobs at once. It killed mold and mildew on contact. It absorbed odors and dampness from the air, and it reflected what little light there was, so you could actually see what you were doing. A freshly limed cellar smelled clean instead of moldy, and the food kept noticeably longer in it. Every spring, when the cellar emptied out, the walls got a new coat, a yearly ritual as automatic as planting the garden. A bag of lime cost almost nothing. That bright white wall was not decoration. It was the cellar's immune system, scrubbing the air clean so the harvest could survive. Number 6. Charcoal and wood ash for odor and pests. 2 things came out of every wood stove for free, and both went straight to work in the cellar. A few chunks of charcoal set in an open dish quietly absorbed the damp and the odors, keeping the whole room sweeter and drier, the same way people stuff charcoal in a refrigerator today. And wood ash, cool and fine, was layered between rows of stored eggs and roots, where it kept moisture in check and discouraged insects and mold from settling in. Some families even buried root vegetables directly in dry ash for the winter. It was the ultimate in not wasting a thing. The fire that warmed the house and cooked the supper left behind the exact materials needed to protect the food stored beneath it. Nothing was bought, nothing was thrown away, and the smell of a well-kept cellar owed as much to a dish of charcoal as it did to anything else. Number 5. The ventilation pipes, high and low. The single greatest cellar trick was invisible, and it was AIR. A proper root cellar had 2 pipes or vents, and where they sat was everything. A low intake near the floor let cold night air pour in, and a high exhaust near the ceiling let the warm, stale, gas-filled air escape. On a frigid night, the keeper opened both and let the cellar chill down. On a brutal sub-zero stretch, she closed them tight to hold the cold out. That constant managed flow of air did 2 life-or-death jobs. It dialed the temperature in just above freezing, and it carried away the ethylene gas and moisture that the stored fruit and vegetables breathed out, the very gas that would otherwise ripen and rot the whole harvest at once. A keeper who understood her vents could hold a cellar at perfect storage temperature all winter, using nothing but the cold outside and the timing of when to open the door. 4th pattern break. Here is something the grocery industry would rather you never sat and thought about. Everything in that cellar was free or close to it, and that is precisely why it disappeared. There is no profit in a hole in the ground. No company can sell you a barrel of sand, a crock of water glass, or the knowledge of which corner the onions go in. So when refrigeration and year-round supermarkets arrived, an entire way of feeding a family was quietly retired, not because it stopped working, but because it could not be sold. We were taught that fresh strawberries in January were progress, and in a way they were, but we paid for them by forgetting how to keep ourselves fed without the store. The cellar made families independent. The supermarket made them customers. That was the real transaction, and almost nobody realized a transaction was happening at all. Number 4. The spring house, where the milk stayed cold. Some farms had something even better than a cellar, a spring house built right over a cold flowing stream. The milk, cream, and butter were set in crocks down in the running water, which stayed a steady 50 degrees or so year-round, summer and winter alike. The constant cold flow carried the heat away and kept the dairy fresh for days in the hottest part of the year, when milk on a counter would sour in an afternoon. Crocks of cream waited there until there was enough to churn, butter firmed up between the family's meals, and the whole little stone building stayed cool and dim and smelled of clean water and milk. It was refrigeration, powered by nothing but gravity and a spring that never stopped running. A family lucky enough to have one had cold storage that cost not a single penny to run, decade after decade, simply because they built their dairy where the cold water already was. Number 3. The brine crocks and the pickle wall. Along one wall of a good cellar stood a row of stone crocks, and they were the family's insurance policy. Cucumbers, beans, beets, even whole heads of cauliflower went into heavy salt brine or vinegar, weighted down beneath the surface, where they kept crisp and sharp for a year. This was preservation a family bet their survival on, because a wall of full crocks meant that no matter how long the winter dragged or how late the spring came, there was food. The brine did the work that a freezer does now, holding vegetables in suspended animation through months of cold and dark. A barrel of cucumbers became a barrel of pickles. A glut of summer beans became a winter of tangy, salty green beans. The salt and vinegar cost a few cents. The vegetables came from the garden, and that quiet row of crocks against the wall was worth more than money. It was certainty. Number 2. The metal bins that outsmarted the rats. A cellar full of food is a feast for mice, rats, and weevils, and the dried beans, peas, corn, and grain were exactly what they came for. So the careful family never left those staples in a cloth sack. They poured them into metal bins and tins with tight lids, where no tooth could gnaw through and no insect could crawl in. A winter's worth of dried beans, the cheapest and most reliable protein a poor family had, sat safe inside a steel can while the mice gave up and went elsewhere. Some families set a board of mouse traps along the wall and kept a barn cat on patrol down the cellar stairs. But the metal bin was the front line. It cost a few dollars once and lasted for decades. There was no heartbreak quite like opening a sack in January to find the rats had eaten the very beans that were supposed to feed your children. And the metal bin was the simple, permanent end of that heartbreak. Number 1. The weekly sort and the truth behind the oldest saying, "You know." At the very top of this list is not a tool or a trick at all. It is a ritual, and it was the one thing that made every other trick on this list actually work. Once a week, all winter long, someone went down those cellar stairs with a lamp and did the rounds. They turned the apples and pulled any that had softened. They squeezed the onions and tossed the ones gone soft. They checked the brine in the crocks, felt the potatoes for sprouts, and dug out anything beginning to turn before it could spread. Because that is the real meaning of the oldest saying, "You know," without knowing where it came from. One bad apple really does spoil the whole barrel, breathing out gas and mold that take down everything around it. The entire cellar lived or died on whether someone cared enough to go down each week and find the one rotten thing before it ruined the 100 good ones. That weekly walk down the stairs was love made into a habit. It was a person saying, "This food is going to feed my family, and I am not going to let a single careless week take it from us." Every trick in this video depended on that one person with a lamp. The sand, the wax, the brine, the vents, none of it mattered without the hands that checked on it. That is the secret nobody can sell you, and the one we forgot most completely. Not a technique, a kind of attention. Here is my challenge. Pick one of these and try it this week. Wrap a few apples in newspaper, grease a half-dozen eggs, and set them in the coolest corner you have. Bury a couple of carrots in damp sand in a box on the porch. Then come back in 2 months and tell me if I am wrong, because I tried these, and my carrots and sand outlasted the ones in my refrigerator by a month. Tell me in the comments which one you are going to do. I want to know if the greased eggs get more love than the sandbox. And I want to know if anyone out there still has a real cellar under the house. Because these were never just tricks for keeping food. They were a whole way of living that made families strong and steady and unafraid of winter. Your grandparents knew, now you do too.